There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's a pleasure today to have on Richard Lorenzen. Richard is an American entrepreneur, investor, and CEO of Fifth Avenue Brands, a New York-based public relations firm providing media relations and crisis communication to clients in financial services and public policy. He has been featured by CNBC, Forbes, Fox News, Business Insider, PR, Inc. magazine, and more. Richard speaks frequently on entrepreneurship and policy, including at the United Nations, TEDx, and NASDAQ. Well, Richard, welcome to the Leadership Crucible podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Chief.
Oh, thank you. So tell us a little bit about your journey, because I know you, we'll talk a little bit about your business, but you started that when you were in high school. You've grown that over the last 17, 18 years. So tell us about that journey.
Sure. So I run a public relations firm here in New York City called Fifth Avenue Brands. I've been running the company for a little over 15 years. And I started the company when I was in high school. I was the ripe age of 15 at the time when I started developing an interest in business and entrepreneurship. This was back in early 2000s, so pre Google, pre LinkedIn. But went to the library and started checking out every book that I could get my hands on about marketing or business management, and that's when I sort of made the decision that I was going to start a business. And at the time, when I started the company, we were more of you could say maybe a full service digital marketing agency. Digital marketing seemed like the space that was accessible to a 15-year-old. I was interested in a lot of different areas, like real estate. It's difficult to buy buildings at 15 years old, and so starting a marketing agency seemed to be my best prospect. And so that kind of started the journey of learning about digital marketing and how to build a business. Learned a lot of great lessons along the way. Got some momentum for that company while I was in high school, and that evolved into the firm that I'm running today. Although now we're focused specifically on public relations and for specific types of clients, but that was the early genesis of the firm.
So we'll talk a little bit about your family. I think is in public safety in New York City. Some are in the military. So, what do you think led you to this passion? What was the trigger point when you were 15, 16 years old saying, I really want to, develop a marketing company?
Mm-hmm. Well, and certainly I was also, always very interested in public service and public safety as well. And I started developing an interest in business. And I think, growing up in New York and, being surrounded by a lot of examples of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of big business here, New York City. That kind of started to pique my interest to start going down that path and learning more about what an opportunity in the private sector might look like. And so that I think that was kind of the early inspiration, just being surrounded by, living in New York, surrounded by, so many entrepreneurial figures, starting to expand my horizons a little bit and see what other opportunities there might be.
So when you were, still in high school, what were you working on from that media perspective?
So when I was 15, I learned how to code. and I started teaching myself, what was kind of the early iterations of digital marketing, because this was a long time ago. It's changed a lot since then. But I started learning things like search engine optimization, SEO, blogging, digital advertising, in the nascent stages that a lot of those different categories were in at the time. Um, and and as I started to learn some of those things, I realized that maybe this is also a service that I could provide and sell to small businesses. Keep in mind that this was kind of the early days of digital marketing, so there were especially a lot of small businesses who hadn't fully even embraced having a website yet. So I saw that there might be an opportunity there to start a business, and that's kind of how I got started.
Wow. So that led you then to the development of Fifth Avenue brands, and now you're doing, media relations, strategic marketing. I think you're doing a lot of critical communication work, crisis communication. So tell us a little bit about what you do for companies and how you do it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, as the company started to grow a little bit, and we were providing a lot of different services to clients, we were doing web development, digital marketing, PR was one of those services. Growing up, my mom was a journalist, and so I had an understanding from a very early age of how newsrooms work and how PR works, and press releases and that sort of thing. And as the company started to grow, I realized at one point, it was a mentor who kind of pointed me in that direction. I realized that for us to really grow the company, we had to start to focus our efforts a little bit into a particular category where we felt we could provide the most value to clients. And I could see that area was PR. It was something that we did really, really well. It was a space that we felt was underserved for the particular clients that we work with. And so when I was about maybe 20 or 21 years old, I started to narrow the focus of the firm to specifically being a PR firm, focused within the clientele that we serve, which is mostly financial services clients, as well as public policy and some related areas of tech as well, like B2B tech, fintech, reg tech, and those sorts of spaces. So that's what we do today. We help our clients with doing media relations, crisis communications, and strategic planning for mostly companies within the financial services space and the public policy space.
So let's talk a little bit about the crisis communication, because I've witnessed many companies over the past several years that have a significant issue, and some really communicate what they're doing very well, and some don't. And those that don't usually really struggle to come out of that. So when you're called in to develop a crisis communications plan for an organization, where do you start?
Well, you know what? What we found is that there are a combination of a lot of internal as well as external factors that are driving a lot of these struggles that the companies are wrestling with, and not just companies, but government entities and individuals that are that they're struggling with from a crisis management standpoint. On the internal side, you have the fact that a lot of times there isn't a very proactive approach to anticipating and preparing for crises before they occur. You can see that in examples of companies who are often, caught off guard by scandals, crises, all sorts of issues that come up in their business. You saw that during the COVID pandemic with governments all over the world and in preparation to respond to a global pandemic. So you have a lot of those internal issues that you're dealing with, that lack of a proactive approach to planning. And then on the external side, we're also living in a very polarized, divisive, volatile point in history that's exacerbated by technology and social media that causes information to travel at the speed of light. And so when you combine all those things together, it creates a really challenging environment for companies to manage their message and to communicate effectively when things go wrong.
Yeah. And I would imagine that you're called in when it's not going well.
that's usually the case.
Do you have a lot of companies that actually bring you in to create a crisis communications plan just if something were to go south on them?
That's a good question. So, what we're seeing is following a lot of the events that we've seen over just the last few years, all the supposed once in a lifetime events that we've seen over and over again in the past 4 years or so. What we're seeing is that companies are thinking about black swan events differently than they were prior to 2020. And so there is a more proactive approach now that the stance that companies are taking to, how do we respond to something, whether it's an external issue, whether it's political division, issues in the community or problems within the company. They are thinking about that more thoughtfully in a more organized way than, in my opinion, at least what we're seeing with our clients than they were prior to 2020.
Well, you brought up the interesting term black swan, and I think for our audience, could you, there's two terminologies I've written about: black swan and gray rhino, right?
Yep.
The gray rhino are the things that we know are probably going to happen, and we kind of kick the can down the road, and we don't really address them, and we see that a lot in government. But the black swan events are those things that you really can't predict that all of a sudden come out of nowhere and create catastrophic issues for a company or for a government. So how do you maneuver through those kind of discussions when you go into with a company, or if you're doing public policy, and what are some of the things that you discuss with them, talking about how you prepare them to do a response to those?
There's always going to be that element of the unknown that you can never perfectly anticipate or create a blueprint for what you think might or might not happen, especially 5 years, 10 years out down the road. What you need to know is when those events occur, what are our values in how we respond to those? How do we make sure that those values are communicated consistently across the organization so that our response is uniform and strategic? And how do we make sure that we have the right folks in place within the organization who are specifically, the designated spokespeople, the designated hitters, so that we can communicate with the public, our stakeholder, our various communities in a coherent and organized and uniform way when those events occur. So you can't anticipate the specific events a lot of times, but the posture and the values that are going to be driving how you respond to that should be universal.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've noticed, and working in local government for many, many years, you see the inconsistency of information delivery from different segments, if you will, of the organization on the same issue, and it creates it just undermines the entirety of the process of trying to communicate. And I'm sure you've run into that as well.
Right. It's exactly right. I mean, you can see a lot of examples from that. Just picking up the newspaper.
Oh yeah.
And looking at choose your branch of government, right? Or private companies. And so that's right. And having a centralized strategy where everybody is bought in and everybody knows what their role is and everybody knows what the message is critical. But a lot of times in practice isn't always implemented in the way that it should be.
No, it's not. So I know a lot of your family are in the fire department, police department, military, and I would imagine that, at one point you thought you would probably end up going in that direction.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just growing up in, so for context, my dad is a member of the FDNY. We have other family members in the fire department as well, and it's kind of a tradition that goes back. And so it's a very unique culture. Learned a lot from that culture, and in a lot of ways it's kind of shaped how I be running a company as well.
Yeah. So 9/11. You were how old when that event occurred?
So I was, I think it was about 10.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that had to be with your family members being first responders in New York City. That had to be a really significant, life-changing experience.
Sure. Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. My
Yeah,
dad was there. You know, you're just growing up, also, and you understand, the fire department is such a big family, right? And
yeah,
growing up in that ecosystem, that culture, that family, 9/11 was an event that, uh, you know, it, it shook the department, to its core.
yeah.
One of the it was one of the defining events in the history of the FDNY. And so, yeah, it was something that certainly, growing up, I was 10. I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Um, and, it's something that, for everybody who was kind of growing up during that time, who was, in the service at that time, such as yourself, it it defines kind of how you see the world, and how you think about the role that you play in terms of contributing to society.
No, exactly. So, I mean, how did that shape you as you move forward now in your life and in your business?
I think that, for me, I've always, especially growing up in a family in the fire department, um, always have felt a strong calling, to do something that makes a difference. Um, there are lots of examples of, you have a lot of examples around you growing up of character, of strong leadership, integrity, responsibility. Being in the service is a calling. It's a very noble calling, and so I've tried to. I think I've carried a lot of that forward into, my business career as well. But I've always viewed, the company that I've built, and kind of the role that I have as an entrepreneur, as, sort of a platform to also be able to, contribute to society on a bigger scale,
Yeah,
um, and to be able to give back and serve. So I think it ingrains in you kind of a feeling of an obligation to serve in one way or another, um, and to live your life in a way where you're not just pursuing, um, you know personal success.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's very well stated, and it's unfortunate that we see so many in society today that just don't carry that obligation of paying it forward and making a difference. But I mean, I think that's the reason why you've been successful, because you're doing that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you work with CEOs across the spectrum of business, and what are their perspectives on being an effective leader, and what have you seen just as you go into different companies? What do you see that really makes a leader effective or not effective?
Well, I think it's simple in some ways, and then it's complicated in others.
Yeah,
You know, Simple principles, like, by far the most effective leaders that I've come across, you obviously are people of high integrity, high character. Um, they want to leave the world better than they found it. Um, they're highly resilient people, uh, and they're also really patient in terms of being able to execute, and patience in results. Not every day is rosy. Waking up when
no,
when you're in that chair as the leader, not every day is a lot of fun. But having the patience and the perspective to be able to ride out the low parts of the roller coaster, and having that consistency, has been a defining trait, certainly, I think, for a lot of the most effective leaders that I've seen.
yeah, that's really important. I think that's one of the things that it took me a few years to learn. That when you're leading an organization, especially when you're leading an organization in government, but I think the same is probably true in the corporate sector. You got to take the long view.
Yep.
You've got to know where you're taking the organization, where you want to move it, and understand that it may take 5 years to get that project, or to move where you need to position the organization. And if a lot of leaders become frustrated with the pace of change, if you will, inside the organization. And so, but you have to plant those seeds to make it happen.
Yep. It's difficult because if you think about, the people who are most often leaders, the personality type that naturally tends to fall into leadership roles, not always the most patient of people.
No.
They're very results driven, right? And so it's a difficult challenge for all of us every day.
Yeah, I always like the small wins. I always had the targets on the wall, but you have to embrace those small wins along the way to keep yourself and your crew and your team motivated to make sure they're still looking at the long-term picture. But yeah, it's difficult, I believe. And sometimes CEOs, and I'm sure you've run across sometimes they just don't have the patience and the resilience to ride that wave out, if you will.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what lessons could you share with others about who are beginning their careers and have just maybe taken their first leadership role, or thinking about, I'm going to step up, I'm going to take that next step?
The first thing I would tell them is that the hardest person to lead in a lot of circumstances is yourself. And I find that some of the most important work that I've done in developing my leadership ability has actually just been working on myself rather than working on the people that I'm in charge of leading.
Yeah.
And so taking some inventory of where you think your strengths and weaknesses are, and figuring out how you can put yourself into the best position so that you're utilizing those strengths, and then getting great folks around you who can help complement the weaknesses is an important place to start. So it's tough adjusting from being in a very individualistic role to being in a leadership role. One of my friends recently said that he thinks about it as there are two types of personalities. There are winners and there are leaders. And there are a lot of people who are very successful, high-performing people who are very good at being winners. Very hard to transition from being a winner to a leader because it's such a mindset shift in terms of how you have to think about the other people around you, and prioritizing the good of the organization, sometimes maybe even over your own goals and ambitions. So
yeah. Well, and you touched on I think a really important point. Number one, I think your perspective on you have to lead yourself first before you can lead others is critical. Because if you're not working on yourself and understanding, and sometimes it's really easy at times to identify our strengths, but it's more difficult sometimes to at least admit to our weaknesses. And so I think from a leadership perspective, that's really important. And I'm glad you brought that up. But it's also about surrounding yourself and your teams, whether you're at the C-suite level or you're just starting and you've got a couple of people reporting to you, to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that have different skill sets, different thought processes, and maybe have different experiences than yourself, because that's have you found that to be important?
absolutely. I mean, you said it yourself. You said it best. You don't know where your blind spots are in a lot of circumstances. And so getting the right people around you, advisors, mentors, is an important, it plays a really important role in being able to develop that self-awareness to lead yourself better.
Yep. I've had several deputy chiefs through my time that they were excellent supporters, but they they would come in and say, I don't think you really want to do that. there's some real downside to taking that position, or launching that program, and so you've got to really surround yourself with people that are willing to do that, and then trust what they're telling you sometimes. So
Yep. I
so
said it better.
you talked about the polarization that kind of we're going through right now, and have been going through for several years. And so, what's kind of what's your take from your perspective on the state of leadership in our society?
I think we're in a period right now where unfortunately I think at a lot of levels of society there's leadership that's suffering, or we're suffering from a lack of leadership, maybe we could say.
Yeah,
um, and I think it doesn't help that obviously we live in an environment where we have platforms like social media that kind of stoke uh, division and anger, and politically it creates a dynamic where it's also become more difficult than ever to be a public servant, because um,
yeah,
there's so much pressure to cater to your constituencies over doing what's best for the whole of the community that you serve. um, it's created a really challenging environment for a lot of leaders, and so yeah, I mean, in my opinion, there's a lot of in politics right now. You're seeing a lot of, for lack of a better term, self-dealing, self-interested parties who aren't necessarily always making decisions that are in the best interest of the country. They're making decisions in the best interest of getting reelected.
yeah,
Um, and so when you combine that with the broader, the background noise of everything that's happening in social media and all these different platforms online that allows a lot of this division and polarization to spread, and allows individuals to kind of stay within the silos of their own beliefs, and not have to
yeah.
engage with people who have other beliefs that are different from theirs. It's a recipe that gets you the 2024 presidential election.
Yep. Yeah, I know it's going to be very interesting. And do you see a safe landing spot in the future?
I think, I'm overall. So just to, because we just talked about some kind of negative stuff, right?
Yeah,
I think overall there's never been a better time to be in America. I think there's never been a better time to be a participant in this world. If you look at science, you look at healthcare, you look at technology. There are a lot of really amazing things that are happening.
yeah,
More people are being lifted out of poverty than ever before. There's more economic development. There's more social mobility. More advancements in technology. There are a lot of really really good things ahead. And America, for all of its issues from a political standpoint, which isn't all new. We've been divided
no,
before. Um, for all of those issues that we may have, especially for people on the outside looking in. I travel a lot, and outside the country, there are a lot of folks who look at the political system in America, and that there are some questions, right?
yeah,
But for all of that, America is still the best place that you can be from the vantage point of whether it's starting a business, whether it's science, social mobility across the board. Um, it's still the place where everybody wants to be, and so for that reason, I'm still very optimistic overall.
yeah. I would agree, and I think that the one thing that I think the general population probably needs to step up and demand is accountability.
Yeah,
And, with our elected officials, they're supposed to be there representing us and doing the right things for our country. And I think, we have the power to put good people or put bad people in those spots. And I think we have to take some ownership, every one of us individually, about getting engaged and saying, we have, for all the things you just outlined, we have a great country. We have a potential for a great future, but we need good leaders to get us there. And we have to take some ownership in helping to make that happen.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So for the next generation of leaders, I mean, you're still a young leader in your own right, but for those that are just coming up and thinking about what am I going to do when I'm 39, right?
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to be? Where do I want to go? What do you see some of those emerging issues that they're going to need to address as they come into the workforce and start to move up through the the chain of command, if you will, in their organization?
Well, I think it's never been more important to hone your communication skills as a young leader. I think that's in a lot of ways that's even sort of an underlying issue in some of these other things that we've just discussed. Honing communication skills, knowing who you are as in what values you're going to stand for as a leader. Uh, there's a constant battle to remain consistent with those values as you're faced with lots of different decisions and pressures as you move up the chain of command. Um, you know, and it all goes back to self-awareness. So, learning how to lead yourself first, knowing what your values are, honing your communication skills, and learning as much as you can. If you're doing all of those things, it's hard to not succeed, and it's hard to not have other folks who want to follow you along on that journey.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. The soft skills today, especially for I think some of our younger generation who've come out of COVID and they were kind of locked up for 2 years and
Yep.
Didn't have the opportunity to have those interactions, or I think there are some areas where they need to focus on to make sure that they've got those communication skills set as they're entering the workforce.
Yep, I agree.
Are you hearing that from some of the CEOs you're talking to about just some of their leadership, folks that have potential leadership, just lacking in that, some of the things that you talked about?
What we hear most often from a lot of the C-suite that we work with is that, especially not to pick on, but we're hearing this about Gen Z, is that the C-suite oftentimes wishes that a lot of those folks had stronger communication ability, stronger soft skills, and so if you're a younger leader who's looking to differentiate yourself right now in your career, a focus on soft skills, communication, leadership ability, being able to understand and navigate different and complicated dynamics within, whether it's in business or government or whatever space that you're in, is going to make you stand out. There's no shortage of hard skills. Coding, America does really well with that. Where we don't always do as well is helping people develop soft skills.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly right. And I think that goes both ways though, as well. It's not only a Gen Z issue. I think it's sometimes it's a generational issue because we really haven't spent a whole lot of time focused on that aspect of leadership. And in the past, just because of the way things were, there wasn't a necessity, I guess, because it was pretty much top down.
Yep.
Bureaucratic process. Well, today it's more of a servant leadership perspective where you're bringing all of your teams together, and it's more of a end-to-end accountability process. So, yeah, really, really good point. So, what advice would you give to the next generation as they are coming into the workforce, or maybe they're thinking about maybe going down a different path in life? But what advice would you give them in respect to their own journey?
Start learning, take risks, start early. I think a lot of times, I think a lot of benefit that I've had was starting early, which also gives you the runway to take more risks. And so, I think there's a lot of pressure on young people today to sort of know what you want to do and where you want to go for the next 10, 20 years, especially the folks who are coming out of college. I think it's more important to take action early and to do something. And a lot of times through that process, you also, it opens new doors that you didn't know existed. And you get exposed to opportunities that you didn't even know were there. So start early, keep learning, and certainly if you're in your 20s, take as many risks as you can.
Yeah, no, I think that's really a good perspective. I think the other thing is, you talked about there's going to be doors that open or opportunities that are presented that you can't see right now. Mm-hmm. And so don't be afraid to step through and take a risk, but also really figure out what your passion is. And follow your passion, because if you have a job that is aligned with your passion, then you never go to work every day, right? It's just I have a great life and I do what I want to do. I love what I do, and it just never feels like it's a job. And when you can find that balance, that's a home run.
I agree.
Yeah. Richard, anything would you like to end up with today? Any last piece of advice for our audience?
So, one thing I would say is, obviously for people who are coming into leadership now, you're in your early 20s. You're probably looking at the world right now thinking that there's a lot of stuff going on. We have elections, we have geopolitical uncertainty, there's economic uncertainty. And it probably looks pretty daunting. So I would just say that, just to end it on an encouraging note, I really do think that there's never been a better time to, whether you're looking to start a business, whether you're looking to solve a problem, go into public service, there are certainly enough problems out there to solve. But there also have never been more opportunities and more access to opportunities, thanks to technology and the internet, than there ever has been before. And so for that reason, I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic as a young person coming into leadership today.
Yeah, and I think we've never been better equipped because of the technology and just the intelligence of the next generations of workforce to actually deal with some of these issues and really, develop a great world and a great country as we move forward in the future. Well, Richard, thanks for being on the Leadership Crucible podcast. Honor and a pleasure, and I appreciate all you do each and every day, and my best to your family.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.